You're listening to the summary of the interview. For a link to the full-length episode, please check the description below. This interview is all about nutrient density and how the scientific advisor of Chef Dan Barber has been focused on the connection between healthy soils, healthy food, and healthy people for the last 25 years. Welcome to another episode of Investing in Regenerative Agriculture, investing as if the planet mattered. A podcast show where I talk to the pioneers in the regenerative food and agriculture space to learn more on how to put our money to work to regenerate soil, people, local communities, and ecosystems while making an appropriate and fair return. Why my focus on soil and regeneration? Because so many of the pressing issues we face today have their roots in how we treat our land, grow our food, and what we eat. And it's time that we, as investors, big and small, and consumers, start paying much more attention to the dirt/soil underneath our feet. In March last year, we launched our Patreon community to make it easy for fans to support our work, and so many of you have joined as a member. We've launched different types of benefits, exclusive content, Q&A webinars with former guests, Ask Me Anything sessions, plus so much more to come in the future. For more information on the different tiers, benefits, and how to become a member, check patreon.com/regenerative agriculture or find the link below. Thank you. Today I'm joined by Jill Clapperton, founder of Rhizoterra. Rhizoterra is an international company based in the Pacific Northwest region of the US that's devoted to creating information and knowledge to assist farmers, ranchers, and land managers in their quest to create healthy, productive soils. And this all for the love of food, which obviously I enjoy a lot. Welcome, Jill.
So my background is I started my career with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada as the rhizosphere ecologist. So the rhizosphere is the rooting zone. So it's the root, the soil attached to the root, and the soil that's actually influenced by the root. And what I love about that is it's a whole system look. Well, we showed that when we put a cover crop ahead of wheat, for example, we could double zinc.
That's a lot. And zinc deficiencies is a huge issue around the world.
Measuring quality is really, really hard. I mean, it is outstandingly hard. And they will tell you that again today, that measuring quality, nutritional quality is like something they don't know. It's sort of like measuring soil health and soil quality.
So you need a proxy, basically. Yeah.
Okay, here are the important elements. Zinc, and from a malnutrition standpoint in the world, zinc, iron, beta carotene, so vitamin A. So I said, if you focus on those three, that will make a huge difference. So we were measuring nutrients, and we could see that in our 4-year rotations, like even when we took the fallow out and just added a legume for 1 year, we doubled the mineral nutrient density in the grain, in the wheat. We doubled it. And so we could say at that point, and I have said this publicly, that if you're growing a wheat fallow, your grain is rubbish.
And this is the central, you were mentioning 2020, new year, and I think it's going to be one of the central themes in ag and food in this decade. Like this wheat, although it seems the same, or this tomato is not the same as its neighbor.
No, it's not.
It could be fundamentally different depending on, obviously, even variety, etc. But let's say they're the same. It depends on management, soil health, and what's happening underneath.
Totally. It totally depends on your management. And my grape growers in and the grape growers that I've worked with and know in South Africa will tell you that when they started growing cover crops between the vines, they knew it was going to change everything. They knew, right? It changes the terroir.
You are
working with Chef Barber,
the scientific advisor of Chef Dan Barber, which most people know from The Third Plate. I actually know quite some listeners of this podcast are in the space because of The Third Plate.
Yeah.
So how did that happen? And
that was magical. So I was at Climate Underground, sitting on a panel, and Dan was chairing that panel. So he was the moderator for the panel. And he was really challenging me, like, I have all these amazing chefs in my kitchen and we can tell you what tasty food is. And he said, if it's any good, he said, I think that if it's tasty, it's really good for me. And I said, and he said, so, he challenged me. He said, well, you're measuring this, like, what's the correlation? I said, actually, I don't know. And he said, well, can we measure it? And I said, well, I think, we'd have to work together, because I'd need to have a tasting panel, and they'd have to say, we'd have to have a few things out, and they'd have to say, okay, this is the best tasting. And then we'd have to go and analyze it to see if there were differences between them, to try and understand.
So how did that happen? So you're in the kitchen of Dan Barber with all these amazing chefs, including Dan Barber, discussing nutrient density, and you have your tracer, which is this nutrient density measuring gun between brackets. What was that experience like? I mean, we can see some pictures.
It was an incredibly exciting time. It was so fun to be with people who cared so much about food. I mean, cared so much about food, and really, really love food. So first of all, we just started with the grains. Like, okay, Barber wheat.
Yeah, because what's Barber wheat for anybody who didn't read? Definitely should, but the third plate, yeah.
So anyways, Barber wheat is just that. It's Dan Barber's wheat. It's a variety of wheat, but he's also been having it grown in 4 different places. So we had wheat in the bakery that had been grown in 4 different places. And so we took that grain, we ground it up in my coffee grinder, because I need to have it ground a little bit, because we want to measure the whole density. So we ground it up, measured it, and there was differences between all the 4 places it was grown.
So the same variety, the same, but very different climate, management, maybe even different rotations.
Yeah.
And you could see significant differences between those 4 types. Wow.
Yes, we could. In calcium and potassium and zinc and some of the and iron and some of the other trace elements. So we're like, wow, okay. So, so that's where you say, okay, maybe we blend it all, or maybe we just have it grown here, or maybe we talk to the people who are growing it somewhere else and then actually look at, well, how they're growing it, and maybe we change that.
This tracer is a device, just to explain for people who haven't seen it, it's basically about, let's say, 0.5 meter high, maybe a bit less, on us, basically sticking up, so up from the table, and you put whatever you're measuring, could be the powder of wheat, could be the mixed meal on top, and basically it's connected to, in this case, your laptop, and that's where the magic is, because that's where the calibration software is to actually understand what comes out. And then we get to the fundamental discussion as food as medicine, which has been thrown around a million times, but we're finally, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, getting to a place we can actually start having a serious discussion. I think John Kemp says that in a number of his interviews, like we can actually finally have, or it seems like we can have a serious discussion for food as medicine, which we couldn't have until now. You have the power to change one thing in the food and agriculture system. And overnight, with your magic wand, you, Jill, can change one thing. What would that be?
If I could change one thing, I think I would do the last thing. I would actually create a bank, much like the microloan system. I would create a bank that allowed farmers that were doing regenerative practices to be free to innovate, be free to try things, be free to do what they thought was, to brainstorm and do their wildest idea. I would support that. I would still want to see some data on it, and I would support them to keep records on it.
You just listened to the summary of the interview. For the full-length interview, please find the link in the description below. If you found the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast valuable, there are a few simple ways you can use to support it. Number 1, rate and review the podcast on your podcast app. That's the best way for other listeners to find the podcast, and it only takes a few seconds. Number 2, share this podcast on social media or email it to your friends and colleagues. Number 3, if this podcast has been of value to you, and if you have the means, please join my Patreon community to help grow this platform and allow me to take it further. You can find all the details on patreon.com/regenerativeagriculture or in the description below. Thank you so much, and see you at the next podcast.